There are men born not just for their time, but for all time. Men whose voices echo across generations, whose dreams reshape continents. This is the story of Kwame Nkrumah, philosopher, prisoner, president, Pan-Africanist. The man who dared to dream of a free, united Africa, and who changed the world in trying to make that dream real. On the 21st of September, 1909, in the village of Nkrumah, in the Gold Coast, the British-controlled territory that would one day become Ghana, a child was born who would shake the foundations of an empire. Francis Nwia Kofi Ngonloma, the name given to him at birth. He would later take the name Kwame, the Akan name for a child born on Saturday, and Nkrumah, a name meaning, I am superior to no one. His father was a goldsmith. His mother, Elizabeth Nyaniba, was a devoted, hard-working woman who poured everything into her son. Young Kwame was sharp from the very beginning, absorbing the stories of his people, their proverbs, their history, their pride. But the world young Kwame was born into was a world divided, where British law governed African land, and African men stood hat in hand before foreign administrators. A world where the fruits of African labour enriched a distant crown. Yet within this system, some doors cracked open. Doors marked education. At age 10, a missionary recognized something extraordinary in young Kwame and enrolled him in a mission school that would change the course of his life. He absorbed knowledge with a hunger that never left him for the rest of his life. Nkrumah trained as a teacher at Achimota College in Accra, one of the most prestigious schools in British West Africa, where African and European students studied together under a colonial curriculum. At Achimota, Nkrumah encountered ideas that began to disturb the comfortable worldview colonialism had tried to install. He read, he debated, he questioned everything he had been taught to accept. He worked as a teacher after Achimota, a role he excelled at. But the Gold Coast, for all its beauty, was too small to contain what was growing inside him. The Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, the brutal assault on Africa's last free nation, hardened something permanently in his mind. Selassie's plea to the League of Nations, ignored by the world, showed Nkrumah that Africa could expect no help from the outside. Only Africans could free Africa. In 1935, Nkrumah made the decision that would define his life. He boarded a ship bound for the United States. He had scraped together just enough money for the passage. What he lacked in funds, he more than made up for in ambition. He would not return to the Gold Coast for 12 years. And when he finally did, he would never be the same man again. America, in the 1930s, was not the land of freedom its mythology promised. For a young black man arriving from Africa, segregation was a revelation, not of inferiority, but of the sheer terrifying global scale of racial oppression. The same contempt he had known under British colonial rule, wearing different clothes on a different continent. Nkrumah enrolled at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, one of the oldest and most distinguished historically black colleges in America, founded in 1854. Lincoln produced some of the greatest black leaders of the century. Thurgood Marshall walked these same halls. Nkrumah was brilliant. He earned a bachelor's degree in economics and sociology, then studied theology, then pursued a master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania. He lived in poverty through much of this time, selling fish on the streets of New York in winter, sleeping in cramped rooms with fellow students, surviving on next to nothing. But his mind never stopped working. Poverty could not touch what was growing inside him. It was in America that Nkrumah discovered Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican visionary who thundered that Africa must be reclaimed by Africans and Africans alone. Garvey had mobilized millions with the idea that black people had a homeland, and it was their right and duty to reclaim it. He was profoundly influenced by W.E.B. Du Bois, the scholar and civil rights giant who argued that the liberation of black people around the world was inseparable from the liberation of Africa. He studied Marxism. He read Lenin on imperialism, understanding colonialism as an economic system designed to extract African wealth. He encountered C.L.R. James, the Trinidadian revolutionary intellectual, whose analysis of black liberation through the Haitian Revolution electrified him. Nkrumah began organizing. He founded African student groups, drew connections between the struggles of black people across the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa. He produced newsletters. He drafted manifestos. He wrote at every spare hour. He spoke at churches, at union halls, at student meetings, and those who heard him always remembered it. A network was forming, a web of black intellectuals and organizers who shared a single belief that the liberation of Africa was not a dream. It was a plan. The Second World War gave Nkrumah a deeper understanding of the system he was fighting. Millions of African and African American men fighting for the freedom of Europe, while denied freedom at home. When the war ended, the world was supposed to be free. But for black and colonized people, nothing had fundamentally changed. By 1945, Nkrumah had spent 10 years in America. He had absorbed everything it had to teach him. He left for England in 1945. He carried with him a mind sharpened by a decade of poverty, study, and fury, and a plan that was quietly, steadily becoming a revolution. London in 1945 was a city scarred by war and crackling with the electricity of coming change. The empire that had seemed invincible in 1900 was now showing its cracks. Colonies everywhere were growing restless. Nkrumah plunged into the world of black radical politics in London with characteristic intensity. His closest ally in London was George Padmore, the Trinidadian journalist and organizer who had been agitating for African independence for decades. Together, Nkrumah and Padmore worked to organize what would become the most important gathering in the history of Pan-Africanism. In October 1945, in a workers' hall in Manchester, the 5th Pan-African Congress opened, and the world would never quite be the same afterward. W.E.B. Du Bois, now 77 years old but still formidable, presided. Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya was present, a man who would himself become the father of his nation's independence. Nkrumah spoke with a fire that turned heads. He was among the youngest leaders present, but not the quietest. The Congress produced a declaration that shook the colonial world. We demand for Black Africa autonomy and independence. Not in the future. Not when Britain was ready. Now. Nkrumah forged alliances at Manchester that would last his lifetime, with Kenyatta, with Padmore, with men from Jamaica, Trinidad, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. Back in London, Nkrumah threw himself into the work of organization, newsletters, meetings, correspondence, agitation. He became secretary of the West African Students' Union, building a network that stretched from London back to every British colony in West Africa. He wrote letters, made contacts, organized chapters, building the infrastructure of a movement that would outlast him. Then, in early 1947, a letter arrived from home. The newly formed United Gold Coast Convention wanted him to return to lead their political organization. It was the call he had spent 12 years preparing for. He accepted. There was never any real question that he would. He packed his books, his papers, his ideas, and sailed back toward Africa. 12 years away. Now, at last, returning. 12 years of preparation, 12 years of study, poverty, organizing, and burning intellectual labor. All of it pointed toward this moment. The Gold Coast was waiting, Africa was waiting, and Kwame Nkrumah, shaped by 12 years of fire, was finally ready. When Nkrumah stepped off the ship in late 1947, he had been gone 12 years. The Gold Coast he returned to was changed, but not free. The war had raised expectations. A generation of men had fought for Britain. They wanted something in return. The United Gold Coast Convention leadership were respectable men, lawyers, doctors, successful businessmen. Their approach to independence was cautious and diplomatic. Nkrumah respected his UGCC colleagues, but their patient approach drove him to the edge of his patience. Where the UGCC held formal meetings in offices, Nkrumah went directly to the people. He spoke at markets, at churches, at palm wine bars, on street corners. He told people what they already knew and had never been allowed to say aloud. The market women, the dock workers, the clerks and the farmers, these were his real constituency. The veterans, men who had fought fascism in Burma, in North Africa, in Europe, returned to find their own country still occupied by the same British Empire they had bled for. He ate with them. He sat on the same benches. He listened as much as he spoke. His rallying cry became the rallying cry of a nation. Self-government now! Not self-government when the British were ready. Not self-government for the educated elite. Self-government, now, for every Ghanaian, now. On February 28, 1948, a group of ex-servicemen marched on the British governor's residence and were ordered to stop by colonial police. Police fired into the crowd. 2 veterans, Sergeant Ajati and Corporal Atipo, were killed. Men who had survived Hitler's war, killed on the streets of their own city by the empire they had served. The Gold Coast exploded. Riots swept from Accra across the country. British authorities blamed Nkrumah and the UGCC leadership and arrested them all. They were held without trial in the Northern Territories. A remote colonial detention meant to isolate them from their supporters, but imprisoning Nkrumah only made him famous. When he was released, he walked out a martyr, a hero. His name chanted from Accra to the Northern Territories. The break with the UGCC leadership became inevitable. Their methods and his were simply incompatible. In June 1949, Nkrumah walked away from the UGCC and launched the Convention People's Party. The CPP was something entirely new, a genuine mass movement of ordinary Ghanaians. CPP organizers fanned out across the country, into every village, every fishing community, every market town. In months, the CPP grew to hundreds of thousands of members. Nothing like it had existed in colonial Africa. It was more than a party. It was the heartbeat of an awakening nation. In January 1950, Nkrumah launched the campaign he called Positive Action, inspired by Gandhi's philosophy of non-violent non-cooperation. Strikes, boycotts, civil disobedience. The colonial system, paralyzed by the peaceful withdrawal of African cooperation. The Gold Coast ground to a halt, shops closed, government offices emptied, colonial commerce ceased. British authority discovered that it could not run a colony whose people had decided not to cooperate. The British responded the only way they knew how. Nkrumah was arrested once again in January 1950. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison with hard labor. He was confined to James Fort Prison in Accra, a building whose walls had once held enslaved Africans waiting for the Middle Passage. The cell was small. The conditions were harsh. The British expected him to break. He didn't break. He wrote constantly. From his cell, he continued to direct the CPP through trusted allies who smuggled messages in and out. The British thought they had silenced him. Instead, they had made him a legend. His image appeared on walls across the Gold Coast. The prisoner had become the symbol. In February 1951, under a new limited constitution, the Gold Coast held its first general election. For the first time, the people of the Gold Coast were asked what they wanted. Nkrumah himself, still behind bars, could only wait. The CPP won an overwhelming, historic landslide. and Nkrumah, from his prison cell, was elected to Parliament. His constituency gave him nearly every vote cast. The British governor, Sir Charles Arden Clarke, faced an impossible situation. The prisoner the British had tried to silence had just won the election. Arden Clarke ordered his release. Nkrumah emerged from prison still wearing his prison uniform, a deliberate choice. He wore it like a badge of honor. He was driven through streets of thousands of cheering Ghanaians, and then went directly to Government House, where Governor Arden Clarke waited to receive him. Within days, he was appointed leader of government business, the first African to hold the position. The man Britain had imprisoned to silence his people was now governing their country. He was 41 years old. He had been a prisoner 10 months earlier. He had work to do. The years between 1951 and 1957 were years of negotiation, of constitutional drafting, of elections won and arguments made in London boardrooms. In 1953, Nkrumah addressed the Gold Coast Legislative Assembly with what he called his Motion of Destiny, the formal parliamentary demand for full self-government and independence. Election after election, Nkrumah and the CPP won massive mandates from the Ghanaian people. By 1956, Britain had no legitimate grounds to delay independence further. The democratic mandate was undeniable. They chose the name Ghana, honoring the great medieval empire that had once commanded West Africa, asserting that this was not a new country, but an ancient people returning to history. The flag was designed: green for the forests, gold for the mineral wealth, red for the blood of those who fell for freedom, the Black Star, the guiding star of African liberation. As the date of independence approached, all of Ghana held its breath. The world came to witness. Among the dignitaries, a young Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who had crossed the Atlantic to see what freedom looked like. King would later write that witnessing Ghana's independence gave the civil rights movement a new urgency and a deeper belief in eventual victory. The evening of March 5th, 1957. All of Ghana was moving toward the polo grounds. Hundreds of thousands of Ghanaians had gathered at the polo grounds, and millions more across the country listened by radio. At 5 minutes to midnight, the Union Jack still flew. For the last time, the crowd fell silent as midnight approached. At midnight, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time over the Gold Coast, and in its place, Ghana's flag rose into the night sky. The roar that followed was heard across the continent. Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. 47 years of age, 20 years of preparation. This moment, we are going to demonstrate to the world, to the other nations, that the black man is capable of managing his own affairs. In Harlem, families gathered around radios wept with joy. In the Caribbean, in London, in Nairobi, wherever black people lived, something shifted that night. Dr. King, present in the crowd, said he could not hold back his tears, and when the sun rose on March the 6th, 1957, it rose on a free Ghana. The morning after independence, the real work began. Nkrumah moved with extraordinary speed. Hundreds of new schools were built across the country. Secondary education became accessible to ordinary Ghanaian families for the first time in history. The University of Ghana expanded rapidly, drawing scholars from across Africa and the world. Hospitals were built, roads paved. Ghana's modern infrastructure was being constructed from the ground up. But the crown jewel of Nkrumah's development program was the Akosombo Dam on the Volta River, a project so ambitious it would take years to complete, flooding a vast valley to create one of the largest man-made lakes in the world. When completed, Akosombo powered Ghana's industrial ambitions and brought electricity to millions of homes. For the families who received electricity for the first time, it was a transformation as profound as independence itself. Roads connected regions that had been isolated. Clinics reached villages that had never seen a doctor. Ghana was being built. But Nkrumah's vision was never limited to Ghana. He believed, with total conviction, that Africa's freedom was indivisible. He convened the first conference of independent African states in Accra, the first time African heads of state had ever met as equals on African soil under African leadership. His argument was strategic as much as philosophical. Individual African nations were too small and too poor to resist the economic pressure of the former colonial powers. He expressed this vision in his landmark book, Africa Must Unite, a work that became required reading for a generation of African leaders and liberation movements. His book circulated across the continent and throughout the diaspora, intellectual ammunition for people who needed a framework for their own struggles. He offered asylum and support to liberation movements fighting colonialism and apartheid across southern Africa. Among those he supported, a young Nelson Mandela, who would draw directly on Nkrumah's ideas in the long struggle ahead. His crowning diplomatic achievement came in 1963. The formation of the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa, 32 African nations signing a charter of mutual respect, non-interference, and continental cooperation. For the first time in recorded history, African nations were speaking to the world with a single sovereign voice. On the world stage, Nkrumah was a giant. He addressed the United Nations, met Kennedy, aligned Ghana with the non-aligned movement. He used every platform to argue for African dignity and for an end to colonialism everywhere on Earth. Economically, his vision was bold. He sought to industrialize Ghana, process its own raw materials, and reduce dependence on former colonial powers. In those first years of independence, Ghana's trajectory was extraordinary. The world watched and African leaders everywhere took notes. Power, for all its potential, is also corrupting and isolating. And Nkrumah, for all his brilliance, was not immune. Political opponents were detained without trial under the Preventive Detention Act, a law Nkrumah introduced that betrayed everything he had suffered for. The press was muzzled, independent newspapers shuttered, journalists intimidated. Ghana was declared a one-party state in 1964. Nkrumah was named president for life, a title that would have horrified his younger self. The Gold Coast that had once rung with self-government now fell into a cautious silence. The economic program, for all its ambition, was straining under the weight of its own scale, and the collapse of world cocoa prices devastated government revenue. Meanwhile, the Cold War had arrived in Ghana. The CIA, alarmed by Nkrumah's socialist policies and Pan-African organizing, began working to undermine him. Declassified files confirm that CIA officers made contact with Ghanaian military leaders and actively encouraged instability. On February 21, 1966, Nkrumah left Accra for Hanoi, where he was attempting to broker peace in the Vietnam War. He was flying to end a conflict on another continent. 3 days later, at dawn on February 24th, while Nkrumah was in Beijing en route to Hanoi, the Ghanaian military and police struck. His government was overthrown in a swift, bloodless coup. Statues of Nkrumah were torn down, his portraits removed from public buildings. Nkrumah received the news by telephone in Beijing. He was 60 years old. Everything he had built, the schools, the dams, the alliances, the institutions, the dream, taken from him in a single phone call while he was trying to make peace in someone else's war. President Sékou Touré of Guinea offered Nkrumah refuge and gave him the honorary title of co-president. In Conakry, he continued to write, producing Class Struggle in Africa, Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, and his memoir. The body was exiled, the mind was not. He died on April the 27th, 1972, in Bucharest, Romania, where he had traveled for cancer treatment. He was 62 years old. His body was returned to Ghana and buried with full state honours in his home village of Nkrumah, later moved to a grand mausoleum in Accra. The Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park in Accra draws hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. Nelson Mandela spoke of him with reverence. The vision of Nkrumah was correct, he said. Africa must unite. A new generation carries his ideas forward, finding in them a vocabulary for their own battles against neo-colonialism, inequality, and the unfinished work of African unity. The African Union, the successor to the OAU he helped found, today has 55 member states, its own currency ambitions, its own peacekeeping force, his blueprint still being built. He was imperfect. He accumulated power in ways that betrayed his own ideals. His economic ambitions outpaced his governance. His later years diminished what his earlier years had built. And yet, he gave a people their country back. He gave a continent a vision of its own power. He lit a fire that has never gone out. That black star on Ghana's flag is still flying. It was always meant for all of Africa. It is still rising.